The amendment is not agreed to. Any further amendments? Senator Cruz.
Mr. Chairman, I call up Amendment ALB 21988. This amendment clarifies that juvenile criminals who are tried as adults and who receive long sentences have to serve the vast majority of their sentences. The First Step Implementation Act allows criminals who committed their crimes as juveniles to be released early if they've served 20 years of their sentence. Now, 20 years is a long time, but it is nowhere near sufficient if a person has committed crimes so serious, crimes like murder, child sex abuse, or similarly heinous crimes, that he was not only charged as an adult, but was sentenced to 30 to 40 to 50 or more years in prison. When you have a prison sentence that long, it is because the crime of which that individual was convicted is extraordinarily serious. This bill makes clear that if a person, even a juvenile, commits a serious crime, they should do serious time. And that's why my amendment prevents individuals from receiving early release unless they've served at least 80% of the time to which they were sentenced, so that you do not have an instance of someone committing a horrific crime, being sentenced for a very long time, and then being let out early. And I would point out someone who is a juvenile who, say, was 16 or 17 when they committed the crime, 20 years has them being released at 36 or 37, and in the case of an extraordinarily violent defendant, a 36 or 37-year-old who has 20 years in prison, has a very high likelihood of coming out and committing another horrific crime of violence and just perpetuating the cycle. And so I urge a yes vote on this amendment, and I ask for a roll call vote.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Leahy.
Mr. Chairman, in my years as a prosecutor, I asked for a lot of tough sentences, and especially if it's a violent crime, I always ask for them, and I tried a lot of those cases myself. But I also felt that the ultimate decision was not that of the prosecution, it was that of the judge. And I found that while I may have had some times where I disagree with the judge, I'm absolutely convinced I was then, I am today, that so much of this should be in a judicial discretion, and we should not be cutting that. I will oppose the amendment.
Thank you, Senator Leahy.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Booker.
Yeah, again, I really appreciate the depth and substance of this conversation. I just want to point out that, this is a bill that really takes into account after that person has spent the majority of their lives in prison. And we know psychological studies show that the teenage brain is not fully developed. It leads to impulsive, immature decisions. Even the Supreme Court has recognized those mitigating factors. There is considerable things in this bill to protect against the concerns of society in terms of our safety. The person, the age of the defendant, the time of the offense, the report and recommendation of the Bureau of Prisons that has to include whether the defendant has complied with all BOP rules and completed prison programming, a report and recommendation of the United States District Attorney in the district where the defendant was prosecuted, the victim's views. All of this has to be in there. I have spent a lot of time working with my colleagues on juvenile issues, including the banning of juvenile solitary confinement, which this committee did because, again, of the effect on those childhood brains. But the most moving testimony I've heard on this issue is from a colleague of many people here. I did not have the privilege of serving with Alan Simpson, but I just want to read his own commentary on issues like this. He says, and many people might know, that he committed some very serious crimes as a child. In his writing to the Supreme Court on issues of mercy for children, my list of childhood offenses is long. When I was a high school student in Cody, Wyoming, some of my friends went to old barrack structures. We set federal buildings on fire, torching them. I'm going to skip some of the other crimes he's talking about. I was lucky nobody was injured. My friends and I often played dangerous games with guns, shooting our shells off. They shot at people. I'm adding that now. I'm damn lucky no one was killed or seriously injured, his words. Still, that was not enough. My friends raised hell in the community, firing our weapons at road graders, killing a cow. Federal authorities caught us. He goes on to talking about attacking police officers physically. He was convicted. He was sentenced. But that was his teenage years. And he did not get a 20-year sentence. But God, are we a country that thinks that children, even when they do heinous things, have no pathways to redemption after spending more than the totality of their life at the time of the crime in prison? God, this bill puts a very high hurdle for the evaluation of these young people. But the nation we live in recognizes that everybody here, and I don't mean to be so general, so maybe I'll just say for myself, like many young people I know, did stupid stuff, and thank God nobody got hurt. But sometimes people do, and it amounts to a very serious crime. I saw this in college. Are we a country that says that under no circumstances does that person have, after the majority of their life in prison, a pathway to redemption? I believe we are a nation that believes in those ideals, that everyone on God's earth deserves grace, mercy, and a pathway to redemption.
Thank you, Senator Booker. I would just add that I want to go back to where I started. This is not automatic. A person who is petitioning for a reconsideration of their sentence is embarking on a long, challenging journey, including those who are arrested as juvenile offenders. According to Senator Cruz's amendment, a juvenile offender could not be released before serving 80% of their sentence, even if they've already served 20 years. We took a survey in the Bureau of Prisons. Out of 150,000 prisoners, how many convicted juveniles might be eligible to petition under this process? 10. 10. I don't know the circumstances of those 10, but I want to make it clear, start to finish, this is not automatic. Petitioning for a reduction in sentence is not automatic. It begins a long, arduous process for a person to prove that they are not a danger to society any longer. It's a high bar. To automatically exclude them unless they serve 80%, I think, just defies the very purpose of the original Corrections Act and the First Step Act, and I would urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment. Anyone else seek to be heard at this point? Roll call. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy?
No.
Mrs. Feinstein?
No.
Mr. Whitehouse?
No.
Ms. Klobuchar? No. Mr. Coons?
No.
Mr. Blumenthal? No. Ms. Hirono? No. Mr. Booker?
No.
Mr. Padilla?
No by proxy.
Mr. Ossoff? No. Mr. Grassley?
No.
Mr. Graham?
Aye, by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn?
Aye.
Mr. Lee?
No.
Mr. Cruz? Aye. Mr. Sass?
Aye, by proxy.
Mr. Hawley?
Aye.
Mr. Cotton?
Aye, by proxy.
Mr. Kennedy?
Aye, by proxy.
Mr. Tillis?
No, by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn?
Aye, by proxy.
Chair Durbin?
No.
Chair Durbin, the votes are 8 yeas, 14 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Any further amendments?